Hello and welcome back everybody. For today's video we are having a new huge tournament which is held in Norway, which is Norway Chess 2024. This is the first round and we are facing the two top American players, Hikaru Nakamura and Fabiano Caruana with the white pieces. So let's see how the game goes. So Fabiano starts with e4, Nakamura plays c5, which is unusual because Nakamura likes to play e4, e5 and go for some quick draw, but Hikaru is really not having it and he really just wants to play fun and he wants to win the game. So this is why he chooses an aggressive opening such as the Sicilian defense. So we get knight to f3 from Fabiano, pawn to d6, and now pawn to d4, c takes d4, knight takes d4, and we are having the open Sicilian. Knight to f6, putting pressure on the pawn on e4, knight to c3, defending the pawn on e4, and now pawn to e5, which is called the Smishnikov variation. We get bishop to b5 from Fabiano, and now knight b to d7, blocking the check from the bishop, and we get knight to f5, as now the bishop is no longer controlling the f5 square from the knight to jump to. So we get pawn to a6 from Hikaru, and the bishop retreats all the way back to e2, thanks to the bishop from blocking that light square bishop from hitting the knight. We get knight to c5, putting pressure on the pawn on e4, and also at the same time he is hitting the knight on f5. We get knight to g3, and now pawn to b5 from Hikaru, trying to play on the queen side with some counterplay with some b5 or bishop to b7 to add more pressure on that pawn on e4. We get pawn to a3, stopping pawn to b4, and now bishop to e7. Short castle from Fabiano, and now short castle from Hikaru as well. And we get bishop to e3, finishing his development. And we get bishop to b7, Hikaru also finishing his development, putting pressure on the pawn on e4. Like a lot of players here will go bishop takes c5, but bishop takes c5 is not really such a good move, because after black recaptures with the pawn, now the pawn is corrected for black. Black has got no longer weakness on d6 or a backward pawn, let me say, and now the game is just about equal, or maybe black is even slightly better. Keep in mind also white gave up his dark square bishop, so now black has got the bishop pair advantage. We get bishop to f3 from Fabiano, and now pawn to g6 from Hikaru. Hikaru is playing pawn to g6 to cut off this knight jumps and maybe later on move his knight and go pawn to f5, as this is his main idea to try to gain the control over the d5 square so he can push his pawn later and free up his position. We get queen to d2, occupying the dark squares on the king side, and now pawn to h5 from Hikaru. Hikaru is saying, "Roar, I am coming to you." Now h4 is a threat to remove that bishop, so we get bishop to h6 first, hitting the black rook. We get rook to e8 as it's the most natural move, and now rook fe to e1. So we get knight to e6 from Hikaru. He's trying to retreat the knight to e6 to jump on to d4 later, or maybe f4. Also keep in mind that there is ideas with this knight maneuvering to c5. So we get rook a to d1, putting pressure on the d6 pawn, as it is the backwards pawn in this opening, and this is one of the main weakness that black had in this opening. So we get knight to d4 from Hikaru, blocking that d file, and now we get knight to f5, an interesting sacrifice from Fabiano Caruana. He is trying to exchange that strong knight. Also keep in mind that if Hikaru meant to take on f5, then there is queen to g5 with check, and after king to h8, then we will get queen to g7, which is a checkmate, and the game is ended. So after knight to f5, Hikaru chooses to take with the knight back, and Fabiano just recaptured with the pawn. We get bishop takes f3, g takes f3, now queen to c8, targeting white weak spots. We get f takes g6, f takes g6, and now bishop to g5 from Fabiano, and we get queen to f5, putting pressure on the pawn on f3, also the bishop on g5. Also keep in mind that there is some weird tactics with knight to d5 if this king moves away from g8, as queen takes d5 is going to be a check. So we get bishop takes f6 to remove that defender of the d5 square, and now the knight is free to go there. We get queen takes f6, and now knight to d5, hitting the black queen and the black dark square bishop. Queen takes f3 from Hikaru, and now we get rook to e3, hitting the black queen. We get queen to f7, putting pressure on the knight, and now we get rook to g3, putting even more pressure on the g6 pawn. Also, you may wonder yourself why in this position that Fabiano just not captured the bishop, and after rook takes e7, queen takes d6 and regain his pawn, because Hikaru was going to go queen to g4 and the game will end in a draw due to perpetual check, because after king to h1 he will keep checking, and if the king goes to, then now queen to h3 also is going to be a perpetual check. Maybe also black could play for a win with rook to e6, and this king is not feeling safe. So we get rook to e3 hitting the black queen, and now we get queen to f7. We get rook to g3 putting pressure on the g6 pawn, also defending any checks that comes from g4 again, and now we get bishop to h4 from Hikaru, putting pressure on the rook. Also, if the rook moves away, then the pawn on f2 is going to be pressurized. So we get rook to g2 from Fabiano, defending the pawn on f2, and also at the same time he is remaining putting pressure on that pawn on g6. And ladies and gentlemen, this is a game full of blunders coming up, so you don't want to miss that. So we get king to h7 from Hikaru, moving away from that rook line, and now we get knight to c3, putting pressure on the pawn on d6, and now Hikaru just sacrifices the pawn with pawn to e4. The engine says it is inaccuracy because the engine really was screaming about to play rook to f8 to add more pressure on that pawn on f2, preventing black from going queen takes d6, as bishop takes f2 is going to be so strong for black. So we get pawn to e4 from Hikaru, and now we get queen to e2, putting pressure on that pawn. Also, keep in mind that the d5 square is still occupied. Also, keep in mind that the pawn on d6 is still pressurized. We get queen to f3 from Hikaru. He's just offering a queen trade. Also, if white is meant to take the queen, then this rook is going to be jailed on g2, and the rook is simply trapped, and black is going to win the game. So after queen to f3, white can't really exchange the queens, so he just takes on d6. We get rook a to d8, offering an exchange of the rooks. We get rook takes d8, rook takes d8, and now king to h1. Keep in mind that if white is meant to take the pawn on e4, then rook to d1 is going to be a checkmate, because after queen to f1, then rook takes f1, king takes f1, and queen to d1 is simply a checkmate. So white cannot capture the pawn with the knight. You may also wonder, okay, why he is not taking it with the queen? Because rook to d1 will also lead to checkmate, because after knight takes d1, you do not capture the queen here and be greedy. You just go queen takes d1, and it's simply a checkmate. The white queen will have to sacrifice itself for his own king safety, but it won't work that well. So after rook takes d8, here Fabiano did not capture the pawn on e4, instead he just plays king to f1, running away from that idea. And right now in this position, the engine is saying that a5 is simply a game over for white. And why is that? Because the knight cannot move, because rook to d1 check is so strong, and also at the same time the queen cannot move because rook to d1 is still so strong, and white is just hopeless, and b4 is coming to kick away this knight from defending the square on d1 and freeing up the rook to deliver the checkmate. But Hikaru missed that due to time pressure and played queen to f4, which was a double question mark. And why it is a double question mark? Because a5 and b4 was already easy one. Because right now Fabiano could play queen to e3 and just defend it all. And in fact, we get that on the game, and now black retreats back to f3, and now we get pawn to h3 from Fabiano. And right now, the same idea with pawn to a5 to go pawn to b4 to try to win the game does not work, because Fabiano already played h3, so he can go now king to g1 and king h2, and the whole idea of rook to d1 checkmate is not there. So after h3, Hikaru goes rook to d6, and now we get rook to g1 from Fabiano. This is also a blunder, because right now a5 and b4 is right now a strong idea. And also keep in mind that if white ever meant to trade the queens, the knight cannot move away, because rook to d1 is literally a checkmate, and what else to do? and the rook is trapped. The rook has got no squares. Now the king to g1 is no longer there. So after rook to d6, rook to g1 was played, and that's simply a blunder because it keeps the king away from running. And now finally we get pawn to a5 from Hikaru, pawn to b4 from Fabiano trying to stop him from going b4 himself. And now we get pawn takes b4, a b4, and now bishop to f6 was played in the game. Bishop f6 was simply a blunder due to rook to g3, and black has got no choice. If he checks on f1, then after rook to g1, he's got nothing but to go back to the same square. But after rook to g3, it is still the same. After rook takes e3, then the game will be equalized, and white has got no problems at all. But bishop f6, Fabiano really didn't take an advantage of rook to g3, and instead he captures the pawn on e4, which was simply a double question mark again. Like, this is the fourth blunder we had in the game, and right now the game is immediately over. And let me know what is the move. It is easily, and it is what it was explained before. It is rook to d1 check, and of course the same idea applies, but it is no longer a checkmate because now the rook was on g2, now it is on g1. So after knight takes d1, you actually in fact do not capture the knight and just capture the queen, and black wins the game. And nice win for Hikaru to start off the tournament. Let us see what will happen next. Of course, if you like to see some more dangerous games like that, where every part is trying to hit the other player and win the game immediately, make sure to check back our latest videos that we dropped on the latest tournament, which was Casablanca Chess. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next videos.